I was trimming lilies at the sink when the phone rang. The radio murmured the marine forecast. The kettle ticked toward a boil, and pollen dusted my fingertips a pale yellow. I'd chosen stargazers for Eli. He once said they looked like fireworks caught mid-burst, and I wanted the room to smell like a celebration when I visited him at the hospital later. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and picked up. "Hello, Mara," a woman said, flat as an invoice. "I'm calling about the funeral." It took a beat to place the voice. "Sophie, my daughter-in-law. Funeral." The word snagged in my throat. For whom? For Eli. Her tone barely shifted. "Arrangements are moving along. I need to confirm a time." I pressed my palm to the counter to steady myself. But Dr. Patel said the surgery went well. He said Eli was stable. "That was 2 days ago," she replied. "He died last night. Sepsis." The lily stem slid from my hand and struck the floor with a softened tap. The kitchen seemed to tilt cupboards, breathing in and out, tile wavering under my shoes, while her silence swelled at the other end. "Why didn't anyone call me?" I asked. My voice sounded like it came from the stairwell far away. "I did," she said. "You didn't answer." I pulled the phone away long enough to check the screen. No missed calls, no unknown numbers, no hospital extension. "There's nothing here." "Maybe your phone was off," she said, already bored. "Look, Thursday at 2 works for Reverend Ames, and it'll be small. Family only." "Family only," I repeated. "I am family Sophie. I'm his mother." A pause, then a chill. "Honestly, it might be calmer if you didn't come." Eli wouldn't want a scene. I stared at the flower on the floor. "You can't be serious. You and he weren't close these last few years," she said softly, like something rehearsed. "Let's not pretend now." It wasn't entirely untrue, and yet it felt like a trick mirror. We had drifted, yes, but drift is not choice. When someone moves the shoreline. I swallowed the words that crowded my tongue. "Please," I said. "Let me help plan it. Let me see him. It's handled." Paper rustled near her mouth, the papery sound of decisions made without me. "I'll text details." The line clicked dead. The kettle began to scream. I turned off the burner and stood there until the water stopped shivering. The kitchen clock hiccuped its mild tick, and the lily on the tile threw a thin shadow like a crack in porcelain. I knelt to pick it up and found my fingers didn't quite obey. Funeral. Thursday, without me. I set the stem on a plate as if it needed a boundary to keep from vanishing, then sank into a chair. For a long time, I listened to the house, the refrigerator. Motor lobster truck growling down Harborview Road, the faint rattle of a loose window. Ordinary sounds insolent in their ordinariness, as if the world had not shifted. By evening, I had said his name aloud enough to taste it again, Eli. I rehearsed the sensible steps a person takes, call the hospital the nurse's station. Anyone who might soften the edges of the word complications. But what I actually did was dial Eastgate Memorial because that seemed like a place where information wore shoes and walked in straight lines. "I'm calling about a service," I said when a warm voice picked up. "For Eli Quinn." "Yes, Ms. Quinn," the woman answered gentle. "Everything is set private closed casket." I didn't set anything, I said. "I'm his mother." A small silence, then a careful apology. "I'm so sorry," the woman said. "We were told you wouldn't be attending, that it would be too hard for you." "Who told you that, Mrs. Quinn?" she said. "Your daughter-in-law." I looked at the flower plate as though it might argue on my behalf. "The service is Thursday at 2. "Actually, but," the woman said, paper shuffling, "there's been a change. The time was moved up this afternoon. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. The phone was still in my hand when the call ended, yet the room felt suddenly far. Tomorrow, not 2 days from now. Tomorrow without me. I went down the hall on unsteady legs to the room that used to be Eli's. The door stuck a little at the jamb, as it always had. Inside, the air held the hush of a museum, dusty trophies, a lopsided diploma, a baseball glove that still caved to his palm. The bed wore an old quilt. My mother sewed its squares faded where boyhood had rubbed them smooth. On the desk sat a planner I'd abandoned years ago, the kind with a loop for a pen. I opened at random and found myself paging through calendar squares crowded with my own handwriting. Visit Eli crossed out. Drive to campus crossed out. Dinner Sunday crossed out twice. Beneath some cancellations I'd written. Sophie's reasons in careful, fair-minded script. He's exhausted. His manager is pushing. He caught something. He needs quiet. Next week is better. A neat woman's attempt to be understanding preserved in ink. The farther back I flipped, the more repetitions I found. Invitations replaced with explanations. Plans replaced with postponements, then with nothing at all. The absence had crept so slowly that I mistook the thief for nightfall, an ordinary, dark, inevitable, no one's fault. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the planner close on its own. A woman tries to be gracious, and the world admires her for it. But habitual grace has a way of thinning into permission. I watched dust swing in the beam of the desk lamp and told myself I would be calm in the morning, that I would dress and sit quietly at the back of St. Mark's, that grief would mind its manners if I asked it kindly enough. Across town in a shingled house I had not been invited to in years, Sophie was likely printing programs. The thought made my throat ache. I lay down without undressing and listened to Harborview climb into night doors, thudding gulls complaining over the harbor, a motorcycle making a point on the next street over. When sleep came, it brought a 6-year-old boy with a baseball bat, too big for him, grinning at me through grass stains. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I woke with my cheek damp and the room thin with morning. Outside, the sky had shrugged into a pale blue. The kettle's first click of the day sounded indecently cheerful. I stood at the sink and stared at the plate with the lily on it. Its edges had browned while I slept. At 9, I dressed in the suit I wore to school board meetings and to my mother's funeral. It had the sober, useful look of a garment that doesn't need introductions. I pinned my hair up and smoothed the skirt with my palms. I kept thinking that if I moved correctly, if I did not rush, if I did not make noise, the day might yield a different outcome, the way a locked door sometimes opens when you try it twice. I left the house and stood on the porch. The coastal air was tart with salt and wood smoke. Leaves scraped the sidewalk like small brooms. I did not drive to the church. I wish I could claim courage failed me. But the truth is simpler. I had been told. And then told again. The times had been changed without me. The words family only had been stretched to exclude the one person who had wiped Eli's mouth when he was teething and his knees when he fell. I leaned on the rail and watched 2 sparrows argue their way along the telephone wire. When the church bells began, they were mere suggestion. At this distance, a handful of faint notes tossed toward the wind. Somewhere across town, a casket was being lowered into a rectangle of earth. Somewhere, a pastor said the right words in the right order, and people nodded because that is what we do when the ritual carries us. I remained on the porch, my fingers cold around the banister. It is possible to be faithful and still be absent, to be excluded, while the world insists it is only following the rules. By the time the bells fell quiet, the lily on the plate had wholly bruised. I carried it out to the garden and returned the stem to the soil. Back at the table, I set my phone in front of me and watched the empty screen. I thought of how a life can be rewritten with a handful of sentences. He's busy. She's fine. It's complicated. Not today. I thought of the planner pages where I had practiced patience like scales on a piano, not noticing when patience slid into erasure. The house ticked and sighed. The clock inched past 10. I pictured Eli's name on a service card, designed by someone who believed that control equals love. I placed both hands on the table to keep them from shaking. I did not attend my son's funeral. I sat very still and began at last to suspect a pattern. By the 7th morning, I had learned how to wait with a phone in my hand. For 6 days straight, I called anyone who might be allowed to say out loud where my son lay: Eastgate Memorial Parish offices, the clerk's desk, at Town Hall with its sincere hold music. The answers arrived in many polite shapes, but the same outline. "I'm sorry, Ms. Quinn, immediate family only." Somehow the phrase had been tailored to exclude a mother. When the landline rang again, I almost let it. Then I picked up. "What are you doing?" Sophie blurted before the greeting. Her voice was raw, the opposite of the cool that had sliced through me a week ago. "What are you doing to my life?" I looked at the small ceramic boat Eli made in 3rd grade, beached forever on my windowsill. Sophie, slow down. The attorneys called, she rushed on. "They said there's an issue with the A throat click with the will. They want to meet tomorrow." "What did you tell them?" I haven't told anyone anything I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. "I've been trying to find where my son is buried." Silence gathered dense and awkward. Paper scuffed near her mouth. A sleeve rasped the phone. When she spoke again, a different register edged in fear. "Mariners Rest Cemetery," she said. "Section C, Plot 247. I wrote the numbers on the back of a seed packet with the first pen I grabbed. The ink bled where damp had softened the paper. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she murmured. "Lena." She stopped, corrected herself. "Mara, please come. Not the cemetery. Here, we need to talk. Not on the phone. I'll come after I visit the grave." "No," the word cracked. "Before, please." We hovered in a small stalemate that felt like standing in a doorway, while the wind argued with both sides. Then the line went quiet. I drove to Harborview's north side at noon, to the cedar-shingled house where once upon a time I'd carried cupcakes for Eli's birthdays and later nothing at all because invitations stopped arriving. The door opened on the second knock. Sophie stood there looking unvarnished hair in a loose knot. Shadows stamped under her eyes, blouse wrinkled along one sleeve, like she'd slept in it and changed her mind. "Come in," she said. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast and printer toner. Paper sprawled across the table in a careful mess, copies with yellow tabs, envelopes opened with guilty neatness, a legal pad weighted by a mug. The printer sighed, then fell back to breathing. She poured coffee, forgot the sugar, set the spoon in my cup like a flag. "What did the attorneys say?" I asked. "That Noah amended his will 3 months ago." She stared at the legal pad as if it might refuse to be read. "He left everything to you." Something heavy and hot moved through my chest. Everything. The house, the savings, the policy. She glanced up and quickly away. "He didn't tell me. He told his lawyer. They called me because I'm the spouse on file. And you think I think nothing she said, though. Her hands trembled. I just know the call came, and now I can feel everything sliding. The table fan knocked its head left and right. "There's more," I said. She nodded. "He hired a private investigator 6 weeks before surgery. The admission cost her breath. He thought something was wrong between you and him. He said you had pulled away." "And did this investigator find anything?" My voice stayed mild by effort. She swallowed. "He found enough." The word arrived small. Then the rest pushed out in one long piece. "He found messages. I intercepted emails. I deleted visits. I canceled in your name texts. I answered, pretending to be him." She looked at the floor. At first it was excuses, then routines, then control. I stood very still the way you do when a shelf tips, and you can't yet tell what will break. Years of postponements paraded through my head. "He's exhausted, next week will be better, work is a lot." I had taken every explanation at face value, the decent reflex that feels like kindness, until you realize you've been leaving the door unlatched. Why, I asked. No ornament, just the small word. "Because I was afraid," she said. Before Eli, I was engaged to someone whose mother thought I was wrong for him. She smiled while she cut me out. I promised I'd never be on the outside of that door again. She looked up, didn't flinch. When Eli loved me, I mistook control for safety. By the time I saw what I was doing, I didn't know how to undo it without losing everything. "You didn't undo it," I said. "You refined it." She nodded once. He confronted me when the investigator handed him a stack of printouts. He wasn't cruel, he was sad. He told me he'd changed his will. He said he was giving you what I took. He told me I could help repair his last weeks or make them worse. We let the quiet sit. The refrigerator kicked on and a gull heckled the harbor from far away. "What's the lawyer's name?" I asked. "Julian Park," she said. "Bay Street, 2 o'clock tomorrow." "I'll go alone," I said. "Good," she whispered, surprising us both. "There's something he's supposed to give you." Park and Wells had that particular hush offices learn when people bring their lives in paper to be measured. Books lined the walls without swagger. A clock with a narrow second hand skimmed its way around a pale face. When Mr. Park came in wireframes gray-threaded at his temples, he didn't extend his hand immediately. He gestured to the chair like welcome was a verb. "Ms. Quinn," he said, "I'm Julian Park. Thank you for coming." He set a file on the desk, thick but not theatrical. From an inner sleeve, he drew a single envelope and slid it toward me. Mara was written across it in a print I could have picked out of a lineup. Eli's neat and slightly right-leaning the E formed like a ladder. "He asked me to give you this if certain contingencies occurred," Mr. Park said gently. "If he died," I said because I had no appetite for euphemism. He inclined his head. He also asked me to convey one sentence verbatim. "Trust yourself." My fingers recognized the paper before my mind did. For years, I had signed field trip slips, taped B+ tests to the fridge, folded notes that began, "Don't worry, I fed the cat." I turned the envelope and teased open the seal with my nail so it didn't tear. "Would you like privacy?" Mr. Park asked, already half rising. "Yes," I said. When the door settled, I drew out 4 pages front and back ink steady, in some places rushed in others. "Mom," the word lifted off the paper. I cried once quickly, like a body exhaling after a long-held breath, then made myself read. "If you're holding this something I meant to fix is beyond me. I'm sorry for leaving you the work. I kept thinking you'd stepped back because I'd done something wrong. It was easier to blame myself than admit I'd let someone stand between us. 6 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator because I couldn't shake the sense that there was a draft in a closed room. He found where the window was cracked. He brought me timelines, screenshots, records, calls you made. Emails you sent, visits you planned, detoured before they reached me. I'm writing the facts not to reopen wounds, but to apologize for the years I mapped the distance wrong. You didn't leave. You were moved. 3 months ago, I sat in Mr. Park's office and changed my will. I asked him to make you the sole beneficiary, not as punishment to anyone, but because trust belongs with the person who kept showing up even when the latch was quietly dropped on the other side. Do what you believe is right. If mercy feels truer than punishment, choose it. If accountability is the kinder mercy, choose that. I believe you'll choose well. Please don't let this season rewrite the years before it. I grew up steady because of you. You taught me how to fix a wobble in a chair and how to apologize without adding a but. That's why this took longer than it should have. You raised me to assume good. I don't regret that. I regret not checking when something felt off. You're allowed to miss me and be angry with me at the same time. I'm angry with me too. I'm also grateful for you. One request: if you go to where they put me, don't go alone if you can help it. If you do go alone, take something of mine to hold. Not because I'm there exactly, but because weight helps when the ground speaks. I love you, Mom. I never stopped. Eli. I sat with the pages in my lap until my heart quit galloping. Then I read them again, slower the way you reread a recipe to make sure you didn't miss the one step that decides if the cake survives the oven. When Mr. Park returned, he set a small box of tissues near my elbow, like a gentleman's joke against the obvious. He also left documentation, he said, tapping the file. Timelines, copies. He wanted you to have proof so you wouldn't have to argue for truth. "Does Sophie know about this letter?" I asked. "No," he said. "She knows about the will. This was for you alone." I slid the pages back into their envelope the way you return a fragile bird to its nest. "Thank you. If you need help with next steps, legal or otherwise, I'm here," he said. "It's also allowed to go home and do nothing for a day." I stood and found that my legs obeyed. "I'll do what he asked," I said. It was the only sentence that fit. Bay Street was performing its ordinary noon when I stepped outside a delivery truck huffed. 2 kids argued about a skateboard. A woman carried a paper bag of groceries with both arms. The air smelled like rain, considering its options. I held the envelope against my ribs as I walked to the car. At the red light, I looked at the seed packet in the cup holder. Section C, Plot 247, Numbers like a hinge. I thought of all the ways a life measures itself, addresses, birthdays, serial numbers, and how sometimes truth unlocks with something as plain as a location written in a shaky pen. I didn't go to Mariner's Rest that day. I drove the long route home instead, past the diner where Eli and I ordered pancakes on the morning of his first interview, past the public courts where he sank a 3-pointer exactly once and preserved the moment like glass. The town looked like the same town it had been the day before, but inside the sameness, a seam had split. Air moved through. Back in my kitchen, the lily I'd replanted had taken the water. Its edges, which had browned after a hard night, had lightened by a shade. I set Eli's letter beside it and rested my palm on the table until my hands stopped trying to shake. I had not been forgotten. I had been written out. That was a different grief and a different kind of work. But work at least could be done. The next morning, I called Mr. Park to confirm a time for documents I didn't yet know how to name. Then I called Sophie and told her I would see her only through the lawyer from now on. She didn't argue. Perhaps she understood that boundaries properly placed are not a punishment, but a frame, the thing that lets a picture stop blurring. I opened my old planner and wrote one sentence in today's square in the same looped script that had once recorded dozens of canceled visits. Go slowly, but go. I underlined it once. Then I put the pen back in its loop and made tea I would actually drink. Outside, Harborview went about its business. A gull scolded the tide flat. A dog made his rounds confident of his block. Somewhere across town, soil held what it was given. I looked at the envelope on the table and thought a letter is also a door. I reached for my keys. I set Eli's letter beside the lily and tried to let my breathing learn its slower tempo. For a week, grief had behaved like weather, fierce then airless, but the letter gave me a spine inside the storm. I washed the cup I hadn't used and put it on the rack to dry. When I reached for a towel, an old thought knocked the coffee tin. When Eli was little, he loved hiding treasure in the pantry's back corner marbles. A pirate coin from the museum gift shop, a compass that never pointed anywhere anyone needed to go. I reached up to the top shelf and found the dented tin by memory. The lid resisted, then loosened with a sigh. Quarters and nickels flashed a small clatter of years. Under the coins, a brass key wrapped in masking tape. On the tape, in Eli's print box 247. Beneath the key, a thin slip torn from a legal pad. If you need proof, start here. Morning made a pale square on the kitchen table. At Harborview Trust, a clerk with a name tag and a kind face led me through a hallway of safe deposit doors, each one a quiet promise. The key turned in 247 like it belonged there. Inside a manila envelope and a velvet box, waited as if they had been practicing patience. The velvet box held my mother's locket, sun-soft gold with a tiny hinge that clicked like a polite secret. I had given it to Eli when he got engaged and told him to save it for a daughter. He had saved it for me. In the envelope were 3 letters in Eli's careful hand, dated in a ladder of months. 18 months ago. Did I do something wrong? I miss you. 8 months ago. The explanations don't add up. 6 weeks before surgery, I hired someone. If I'm right, I'll fix it. The lines carried no theatrics, only a man trying to reverse a silence with facts. At the bottom lay a single sheet with a court stamp petition for dissolution filed 2 weeks before the operation. No signature from Sophie. Eli's alone. The paper weighed almost nothing. Yet my arm ached holding it. He had been sketching an afterword. I drove home by the long way past the public courts where Eli once sank a single glorious 3 and insisted we stop for pie to celebrate past the bookstore that slid handwritten notes under certain titles for readers who like slow miracles. Harborview looked ordinary, but something under the town had shifted like the tide pulling new lines into the sand. The phone rang just as I set the deposit box envelope on the table. Sophie. "Did you go?" she asked. Not hello. Yes, I said. I found the locket, letters, a filing. She didn't ask which filing. Then you know, she whispered, he was making plans. We need to meet, I said, at Mr. Park's. Tomorrow morning. I'll be there, she said, and sounded like a person agreeing to open a door that might not stay on its hinges. Park and Wells kept a conference room that knew how to hold people together without pretending to fix them. Sun swung in across a long table. The shelves kept their books without swagger. Mr. Park greeted us with that steady courtesy of someone who arranges facts for a living and understands that feelings refuse to be arranged. Thank you for coming, he said once we had settled. I understand there are choices to make. We'll start with the truth, I said to Sophie. All of it. She nodded, fingers laced tight. I was afraid, she said. Years ago before Eli, I was engaged to someone whose mother decided I didn't belong. She cut me out smiling. When Eli loved me, I promised myself that would never happen again. At first, it was small, a postponed dinner, a soft excuse. Then I learned how to make it look reasonable. Control felt like safety. By the time I realized what I'd done, I thought the only way to undo it was to lose him. You didn't undo it, I said. You formalized it. She didn't look away. He found the messages, the ones I intercepted. The emails I deleted, the visits I canceled using your name, the texts I answered, pretending to be him. 6 weeks before surgery, he showed me a stack of printouts. He said he had changed his will. He said he was giving you what I took. He asked me to choose between helping to repair his last weeks or being the person who ruined them. The room quieted in a way that made space rather than pressure. Mr. Park waited without hurrying us. I took Eli's letter from my bag and touched the last paragraph without unfolding it. If mercy feels truer than punishment, choose it. If accountability is the kinder mercy, choose that. I've decided, I said. Sophie's shoulders rose, braced for impact. You will keep the house, I said. She blinked in the wrong rhythm, like a clock that had lost a gear. I what? The house, I repeated. Not the savings, not the policy. Those will seed a foundation in Eli's name to help families stay connected when grown-ups forget that small cuts can become big wounds. I slid a typed document across the table. There are conditions. She nodded once, then again like practice. You'll write a full account. I said of what you did calls blocked emails, erased visits, canceled messages, forged. You'll sign it. Mr. Park will hold it under seal. If you ever lie about what happened or try to recast the story, he has my permission to release it. Her voice thinned. All right, you'll begin therapy and stay with it, not for my inspection, but because you need someone who isn't me and isn't Eli to help you build a different definition of safe. She swallowed. Okay. I took a small photo book from my bag. Eli at 5 with frosting on his face, 9 holding a birdhouse that leaned like a question, 16 pretending to be fierce behind the wheel of a car that should have retired before it started. I set the book between us. These are moments you edited out in his adult life. Look at them. Understand the shape of what you took. Sophie opened the book and made a sound small enough to miss if you weren't listening for breakage. Mr. Park placed a pen within reach and waited. She signed the statement I had drafted the night before, and he witnessed, then tied the red string on the envelope like an old-fashioned promise. "What will you call the foundation?" he asked softly. "The Harbor Bridge Fund," I said, "because a bridge is a promise you keep with steel and patience." Mr. Park nodded. "I can file the articles this week and connect you with partners who do good work along this shoreline." I stood. "We won't be enemies," I told Sophie, "but we're not friends. Not now. Send anything necessary through Mr. Park. No surprises, no stories." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Thank you for not burning everything down." "It wasn't mine to burn," I said. "Eli asked me to keep what could still be kept." We shook hands not as a beginning, but as a ceasefire. Outside Harborview's air carried that bright, crisp note I associate with school bands and apples. The sidewalk felt a shade more solid under my shoes. Weeks arranged themselves into a usable routine. Paperwork is its own kind of grief and its own mercy forms to sign accounts to open bylaws to read with a pencil. I asked 3 sensible friends to serve as initial directors. The Harbor Bridge Fund found a post office box and then a small office above a bakery where the smell of sugar helped people tell hard truths. Our first grant bought a bus pass for a grandmother 2 towns over so she could make Wednesday dinners with a grandson she had only seen through a doorway for a year. Another paid a mediator's fee that moved a stalled visitation schedule from Sunday to Saturdays at 2. I visited Mariner's Rest on the season's first clean cold morning. In Section C, the trees had surrendered most leaves to the grass. Eli's name on granite looked both too formal and somehow not enough. I knelt, brushed away a wet leaf, and laid lilies where the earth had opened and closed. On certain days, the word rest felt like a lesson the living needed more than the dead. Through Mr. Park, updates arrived with the spareness I requested. 1 paragraph, no embroidery. Sophie had started therapy with someone who used questions more than speeches. She had given the photo book a place on a shelf, and miracle of ordinary miracles left room for new pages. I didn't call what I felt forgiveness. Forgiveness is exact and expensive. You pay what you owe when the ledger says now. What I practiced was a measured peace, a distance just long enough to keep both of us honest. Near winter's end, a brown-wrapped parcel with Sophie's return address waited on my porch. Inside, a framed photograph of Eli. I had never seen mid-30s, a garden behind him, sunlight making a lattice in his hair. On the back, she had written in a steadier hand, "He kept this near his desk. I think it belongs with you now. Thank you for teaching me what love doesn't have to be. I'm learning." I put the picture on the mantle between the 2nd grade clay bowl and the repair ticket from the first bicycle we fixed together. It looked like a small committee of objects telling the truth without over-explaining. Spring practiced itself on Harborview gulls. Louder sidewalks rinsed by rain that never apologized. The fund printed its first 1-page newsletter because postage should not crowd out help. A note came from a boy of 10 in a hopscotch handwriting. "Thank you for helping my grandma. She brings cookies and a card game and doesn't care when I mess up the shuffling." I slid the note into the envelope with Eli's letter. I liked the harmony the 2 voices made one man, one child, both explaining how connection feels when it finally finds a path. On the anniversary of the day the bells rang somewhere I wasn't allowed to stand, I returned to Section C with new lilies. The grass had thickened and the ground had lost the look of a recent wound. I touched the stone's cool edge and felt the locket warm against my skin under my blouse. "I brought news," I said, feeling knowingly foolish. A grandfather with a bad knee now reads bedtime chapters by video on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A mother and daughter take walks on Sunday afternoons and practice not editing one another's sentences. Sometimes all people need is a little money and a permission slip. Wind moved through the branches like a choir that knew when to be a background and when to be the song. I set the lilies low and stood. The air smelled like rain considering a visit. If you had asked me a year ago whether justice and mercy could balance on the same table, I might have answered like someone who read that in a good book. Now I knew justice builds the boundary, mercy sets the place. Justice needs a solid chair, mercy pours the water. They don't compete when they're doing their real jobs. On the way home, I stopped at a nursery and bought a paper sack of lily bulbs. In the backyard, the soil finally yielding the last of winter, I planted a handful of futures. Bulbs are not persuasive. They don't look like anything. You cover them anyway because faith is sometimes nothing more than a willingness to do the next quiet right task. That night, I lifted Eli's letter again. I could recite the closing by heart, but I read the ink as if it changed while I slept. If mercy feels truer than punishment, choose it. If accountability is the kinder mercy, choose that. I believe you'll choose well. I pressed the pages to my chest. The panic that had flown wild through my body had been replaced by something I could work with, not relief exactly, but a steady readiness. The garden dimmed into a rectangle of dark outside the window. Somewhere under the soil, I had tucked a set of unremarkable bulbs that would refuse to bloom on command. They would need time that couldn't be scheduled, water that couldn't be hurried. The work ahead felt like that slow, stubborn, not always visible. But it was a way back. And for the first time in a long time, a way back was enough. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.